Imagine waking tomorrow to discover that every spoonful of sugar on Earth had vanished. Your morning coffee would taste different. Chocolate would become a luxury overnight. Soft drinks would disappear from supermarket shelves, and entire industries, from candy and baking to pharmaceuticals and biofuels, would scramble to survive. Now imagine something even more surprising. For almost all of human history, none of this existed. There were no sugar cubes, no birthday cakes, no candy stores, no sweetened tea. For thousands of years, the sweetest thing most people would ever taste was honey, painstakingly gathered from wild beehives at great risk. Then one simple plant changed everything. It did not look extraordinary. It wasn't a rare flower or a towering tree. It was just a tall tropical grass, swaying quietly in the humid forests of an island few people outside the Pacific had ever seen. Yet this humble plant would eventually finance empires, reshape global trade, fuel the largest forced migration in human history, inspire revolutions, transform the world's diet, and quietly find its way into nearly every modern kitchen. This is the history of sugar. Around 10,000 years ago, deep within the rainforests of New Guinea, nature had already engineered one of its most remarkable plants, sugar cane. Unlike wheat, rice, or corn, sugar cane wasn't cultivated for its seeds. Its treasure was hidden inside its stem, which stored enormous amounts of sucrose as a natural reservoir of concentrated energy. Sugar cane belongs to a group of plants known as C4 plants, an evolutionary adaptation that lets them capture sunlight more efficiently than most other crops, especially in hot tropical climates. That biology explains why sugar cane produces more sugar per hectare than almost any other plant on Earth. One day, someone cut into one of these towering grasses and bit into the stalk, discovering an explosion of sweetness unlike anything else on Earth. Not the delicate sweetness of fruit, not the floral richness of honey, but something clean, bright, and concentrated. That simple bite marked the beginning of one of history's longest relationships between humans and a crop. At first, sugar cane remained exactly what nature intended. People chewed the stalks, extracted the sweet juice with their teeth, and discarded the fibers. There were no refineries, no plantations, no merchants. Sugar was simply a gift from the forest. Over countless generations, Austronesian seafarers carried sugar cane across the Pacific alongside bananas, taro, coconuts, and yams. Wherever new communities settled, sugar cane followed, from New Guinea into Indonesia, across the Philippines, and into mainland Southeast Asia. Yet despite its growing reach, sugar remained ordinary. No kingdoms fought over it. People still harvested it by hand and enjoyed it exactly as their ancestors had. That would change in India. By roughly 3500 BC, sugar cane had reached the fertile plains of the Indian subcontinent, and Indian farmers and craftsmen began asking a question no one had seriously considered before. What if the sweetness could be separated from the plant, preserved, and transported instead of consumed within hours? Instead of merely chewing the stalks, they crushed them to extract the juice, then heated the liquid over controlled fires. As the water evaporated, the dissolved sucrose molecules began arranging themselves into tiny solid crystals, the same process chemists today describe as supersaturation and crystallization. It was one of humanity's earliest breakthroughs in food engineering. For the first time, sweetness had become portable, able to travel across deserts and survive long sea voyages. The Sanskrit word kunda, meaning broken pieces or crystallized sugar, would eventually travel through Persian and Arabic before giving English one of its sweetest words, candy. Sugar was never viewed merely as a treat in India. Within Ayurveda, physicians believed it possessed healing properties, prescribing it for digestive disorders, sore throats, and weakness after illness, the spoonful that helped medicine go down. Thousands of years before anyone coined the phrase. Word of this substance eventually reached Alexander the Great, who marched his armies into northwestern India in 326 BC. One of his naval commanders, Nearchus, later described discovering a reed that gives honey without bees. But distance remained sugar's greatest enemy. Transporting it across thousands of kilometers was expensive, and by the time it reached Mediterranean markets, it had become a luxury reserved for kings, wealthy merchants, and physicians. Roman doctors prescribed it not for pleasure but for healing. Sugar still belonged inside the pharmacy, not the kitchen. The ancient techniques developed in India had unlocked sugar's potential. But another civilization was about to transform those techniques into an industry. In the 7th century, a new empire emerged from the Arabian Peninsula with astonishing speed, and within little more than a century, Islamic rule stretched from the Atlantic coast of North Africa to the borders of India, uniting some of the busiest trade routes the world had ever known. When Arab scholars encountered India's crystallized sugar, they immediately recognized its potential, not simply as a luxury, but as an industry. Freshly cut cane starts losing quality almost immediately, so Arab engineers designed large-scale sugar mills capable of processing enormous quantities of cane before it spoiled. In fertile regions like Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Syria, water wheels turned massive crushing rollers while canals fed thousands of acres of farmland, some of the earliest agro-industrial complexes in history. Skilled workers carefully controlled temperature in the boiling houses, and generations of experimentation transformed sugar making from an art into something approaching a science. The refining process grew increasingly sophisticated. Impurities were skimmed away, lime and clarifying agents helped purify the syrup, and the resulting crystals were far purer than anything produced before. Whiter sugar became a symbol of refinement, representing technology, knowledge, and status. Perhaps the Islamic world's greatest achievement, though, was turning sugar into an international commodity. Its trade networks connected 3 continents. Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, Basra, and Alexandria all became marketplaces where sugar was sold besides cinnamon, pepper, saffron, and silk. For the first time, sweetness had become global. Physicians combined it with herbs into syrups. The word syrup itself traces back to the Arabic sharab, meaning a drink, and confectioners crafted candied fruits and pastries that amazed European travelers. Then came the Crusades. European armies marching east at the end of the 11th century did not expect to become fascinated by sugar. But crusaders returning from the Levant carried stories of sweet salt and the finest of spices. Demand exploded overnight, yet Europe's climate was simply too cold to grow it. And every grain still had to travel through Muslim-controlled trade routes before reaching European markets, multiplying in price at every stop. Owning sugar became a public display of wealth. The sweeter the table, the richer the family. Venice recognized the opportunity better than any other European city. Strategically positioned between East and West, Venetian merchants purchased raw sugar from Islamic ports, refined it further at home, and sold it across Europe at astonishing profits, becoming Europe's gateway to sweetness for nearly 2 centuries. But demand kept rising faster than supply, and soon Europe stopped asking how to buy sugar and began asking a far more dangerous question: what if we grew it ourselves? In medieval Europe, sugar wasn't simply food, it was status made visible. At royal banquets, elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles or dragons announced a host's wealth to stunned guests. Royal households treated sugar the way modern nations treat precious metals, recording every pound in locked storerooms and serving it only at weddings, coronations, and diplomatic feasts. Medicine kept demand growing too. European physicians, following traditions inherited from Greek, Roman, Persian, and Arab scholars, prescribed sugar to calm coughs, ease digestion, and even improve eyesight. Monasteries became unexpected centers of sugar experimentation, discovering that because sugar binds to water, it starves the bacteria and molds that need moisture to grow, centuries before refrigeration, allowing jams and candied fruit to preserve a summer's harvest through winter. As trade flourished, more merchants could afford sugar, and demand kept climbing faster than Venetian imports could satisfy. Ambitious rulers in Portugal, Spain, England, and France grew tired of depending on Venetian merchants and Muslim-controlled trade routes. If Europe wanted cheaper sugar, it needed warm land of its own, and the age of exploration had just begun. Portuguese sailors ventured down Africa's Atlantic coast and found fertile volcanic islands, Madeira, the Canary Islands, São Tomé. To sugar, they looked like paradise. Portuguese settlers moved quickly, clearing fields, digging irrigation channels, and building mills. For the first time, European powers controlled large-scale sugar production directly. But reality proved difficult. Sugar cane demanded relentless labor, and very few free workers were willing to endure the harvest for long. The plantations needed not dozens of workers, but thousands, and how to secure that workforce would become one of the defining and darkest questions of the 15th century. At first, plantation owners believed they could rely on free labor. Poor settlers, convicts serving out sentences, indentured servants. It didn't work. Sugar cane worked against the clock. The moment a stalk was cut, enzymes and fermentation began destroying its value, so harvest became a race against biology itself. Work began before sunrise in fields of cane towering 3 meters tall, its razor-sharp leaves slicing exposed skin. Workers swung heavy machetes thousands of times a day in tropical heat that regularly topped 35 degrees Celsius. Freshly cut stalks then rushed to the mill, where crushing rollers never stopped. Historical records describe fingers, hands, and sometimes entire arms disappearing into the gears, with axes kept nearby for emergency amputations. Beyond the mills, boiling houses ran at temperatures exceeding 60 degrees Celsius, the floors slick with scalding syrup, fires burning day and night through the harvest. By the late 15th century, plantation owners concluded the work was too exhausting for free labor to sustain at the scale Europe demanded. So rather than changing the system, they chose to change the workers. Portugal had already established trading posts along West Africa's coast, and what began as trade in gold and ivory expanded into trade in human beings. Then, in 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. His second voyage carried cuttings of sugar cane bound for the Caribbean, which offered nearly perfect conditions: volcanic soil, warm temperatures, abundant rainfall. Barbados became one of the first great laboratories of industrial agriculture. Within a few decades, forests gave way to endless rows of cane, and by the mid-17th century this island, smaller than many modern cities, generated more wealth for England than all its North American colonies combined. Sugar had become white gold, and an entire financial system, banks, insurers, shipbuilders, refineries, began revolving around a single crop. That wealth demanded an extraordinary price. Within a few generations, sugar became the economic engine driving the transatlantic slave trade, a triangular network binding 3 continents: Manufactured goods sailed from Europe to Africa. Captives were forced aboard slave ships bound for the Americas, and sugar, rum, and molasses returned to Europe. Historians estimate roughly 12.5 million Africans were forced onto slave ships between the 16th and 19th centuries. Around 10.7 million survived the Middle Passage. Packed below deck in chains amid heat, disease, and starvation, with many destined for the Caribbean's sugar plantations. For those who survived, the ordeal continued. The average life expectancy of an enslaved person on some Caribbean sugar plantations after arrival has been estimated at only about 7 years, and plantation records reveal a chilling calculation. Replacing exhausted workers was often cheaper than improving conditions. Yet resistance never disappeared. Some sabotaged machinery. Others escaped into the mountains to form maroon communities that preserved African traditions while defying colonial rule. The greatest act of resistance unfolded in Saint-Domingue, the French colony we now know as Haiti, which by the late 18th century had become the wealthiest sugar colony on Earth, supplying roughly 40% of Europe's sugar. Beneath that prosperity lay unbearable violence, and in 1791, inspired partly by the French Revolution, enslaved people launched a massive uprising. Over 13 years, led in part by the strategist Toussaint Louverture, the rebellion grew into a full revolution. And in 1804, Haiti declared its independence, the first black republic in the modern world, born from the only successful large-scale slave revolt in history. The shockwaves reached Napoleon Bonaparte. Without Haiti's sugar wealth, holding vast American territory suddenly seemed far less valuable, and in 1803 he sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States, doubling the size of the young republic. One collapsed sugar colony had helped redraw the map of North America. Europe still wanted sugar, and if Caribbean plantations could no longer guarantee it, another solution was needed, one growing quietly beneath European soil. Back in 1747, German chemist Andreas Sigismund Marggraf discovered that ordinary white beets contained crystals chemically identical to cane sugar, the same molecule, sucrose. At the time, extracting it was too slow and expensive to matter. Then came the Napoleonic Wars. Britain's Royal Navy blockaded French ports, choking off sugar imports, and Napoleon, understanding that wars are won by economies as much as armies, launched an ambitious experiment in 1811, ordering tens of thousands of hectares, planted with sugar beets and building factories to refine them. Early yields were poor and costly, but engineers steadily improved presses, filters, and evaporation systems, and by 1813, France was producing millions of kilograms of beet sugar a year. For the first time in history, sugar had escaped the tropics, and Europe was no longer completely dependent on distant colonies. Competition between cane and beet sugar drove prices down, and by the mid-19th century, sugar was cheaper than at any point in human history. Steam power accelerated the shift. Steam-powered mills crushed cane faster than water wheels. Vacuum evaporation improved crystallization. And railways and steamships moved sugar faster and cheaper than ever. Industrial refining also produced something new, fine, bright white crystals that Victorian society associated with cleanliness and modern science, while coarser brown sugar came to be seen, unfairly, as inferior. As sugar grew cheap, it found a new partner, tea. A spoonful of sugar softened the bitterness of strong black tea, creating an inexpensive, energizing drink that factory workers embraced during short breaks. By the mid-19th century, sweet tea was fueling the Industrial Revolution, almost as surely as coal fueled its engines. Confectioners, bakers, and jam and chocolate makers searched constantly for new products to absorb the growing supply, and sugar found another place in everyday life with each passing year. By the end of the 19th century, sugar was becoming ordinary rather than scarce, and manufacturers turned to a new question. How could they persuade people to consume even more of it? The answer arrived quietly, through everyday food rather than dessert. Sugar is remarkably versatile. It sweetens, preserves, balances bitterness, and improves texture. And our attraction to sweetness is deeply rooted in human evolution. Since sweet foods once signaled ripe fruit and safe, quick energy. The modern food industry didn't create that instinct. It learned to exploit it. No country embraced the opportunity more than the United States. In 1886, an Atlanta pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton created a caramel-colored syrup he believed might serve as a tonic. He called it Coca-Cola. As bottling and advertising expanded, it grew from a local curiosity into a global phenomenon, inspiring countless competitors and making sugar something people could drink almost anywhere, at any time. Breakfast changed too. Ready-to-eat cereals, first marketed as wholesome, gradually became sweeter as manufacturers discovered that sugar dramatically boosted sales. Especially among children, colorful packaging and cartoon mascots turned a grain-based meal into another delivery system for sugar. Candy followed a similar path as industrial machinery made chocolates, caramels, and gummies cheap and abundant, while portion sizes across cookies, ice cream, and pastries slowly expanded. Sugar also found an unlikely partner in advertising. 20th century marketers stopped selling products and started selling feelings. Friendship in a bottle of soda, love in a box of chocolates, tradition in a birthday cake, so that people believed they were purchasing happiness rather than sugar itself. And as individually wrapped candies, vending machines, and packaged snacks spread, eating stopped happening only at meal times. Sugar became something to consume between meetings, during school, or simply out of boredom. The numbers tell the story. In 1700, the average Briton consumed only a few pounds of sugar a year. By the early 20th century, Americans were consuming more than 100 pounds per person annually. Most people never noticed how quickly it accumulated, one snack and one soda at a time. And as consumption climbed, warning signs began appearing: rising tooth decay, questions about heart disease and obesity, and growing rates of diabetes, setting the stage for one of the great public health controversies of the 20th century. After World War II, heart disease became one of the leading causes of death across the industrialized world, and researchers searched for answers, debating whether saturated fat or refined sugar deserved more blame. Nutrition science was still young, and while the debate played out in laboratories, another force was moving in the background: industry. Sugar was big business, and any suggestion that it contributed to disease threatened billions of dollars. In 1967, a review article in the New England Journal of Medicine concluded that reducing saturated fat and cholesterol deserved greater priority than reducing sugar. Readers had no reason to doubt its independence, but the authors had received funding from the Sugar Research Foundation, and at the time, medical journals did not require researchers to disclose financial conflicts of interest. The review shaped public health guidance for decades, pushing food manufacturers toward low-fat products that often replaced fat with sugar to preserve flavor. Investigations published decades later, in 2016, uncovered internal industry documents revealing this influence, renewing public debate about conflicts of interest in nutrition science and drawing comparisons to strategies used by other industries facing uncomfortable evidence. Meanwhile, sugar kept changing its disguise, appearing under names like dextrose, maltose, invert sugar, and corn syrup. In the early 1970s, Japanese researchers perfected a process converting corn starch into high-fructose corn syrup, an inexpensive sweetener that, thanks to abundant American corn production, replaced cane sugar in most U.S. soft drinks by the 1980s, a change most consumers never noticed. Scientists still debate whether meaningful metabolic differences exist between HFCS and table sugar, but what's clear is that overall added sugar consumption, from cane, beet, or corn, rose dramatically across the 20th century. Today, added sugar turns up in bread, pasta sauce, ketchup, and granola bars, foods few people would expect. After 10,000 years spent searching for sweetness, humanity now lives surrounded by it, and countries around the world are still searching for the right response. From sugar taxes to clearer nutrition labels. Today, the world produces well over 180 million metric tons of sugar every year, most of it still from sugar cane grown across Brazil, India, Thailand, and beyond, with the rest from sugar beets in temperate regions, two very different plants producing exactly the same crystal. Modern production has become remarkably advanced, with mechanical harvesters, satellite-guided tractors, and real-time quality sensors replacing the muscle that once defined the industry. But the basic chemistry has never changed. Plants are still simply capturing sunlight and building sucrose molecule by molecule, just as they did 10,000 years ago. Our relationship with sugar, though, has grown far more complicated. Governments and health organizations now encourage people to cut back on added sugars, not because sugar is uniquely dangerous, but because modern diets contain far more of it than our bodies ever adapted to handle. Taxes on sugary drinks have appeared in Mexico, the UK, South Africa, and dozens of other places, while some manufacturers have quietly reduced sugar content or introduced clearer labeling. The debate over how much responsibility belongs to companies versus individuals continues, without easy answers. Perhaps that complexity is fitting, because sugar has never been just an ingredient. It has always been a mirror, reflecting the priorities of every age that touched it. To ancient villagers in New Guinea, it was a gift from nature. To Indian craftsmen, a scientific breakthrough. To medieval physicians, medicine. To kings, prestige. To empires, power. To modern consumers, it's often so ordinary we barely notice it at all. Think back to where our story began. Not in a palace, not in a laboratory, but in the humid rainforests of New Guinea, a wild grass swaying in the tropical breeze. No one standing there 10,000 years ago could have imagined that it would cross continents, fuel revolutions, and become one of the defining ingredients of modern civilization. Yet that is exactly what happened. History often turns on the quietest beginnings. The next time you stir sugar into your tea, or glance at the ingredient list on a loaf of bread, remember you're holding far more than a sweetener. You're holding the legacy of farmers, chemists, sailors, merchants, and millions of people, free and enslaved, whose lives became intertwined with one remarkable plant. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history behind one of the world's most familiar ingredients, you're exactly the kind of curious mind this channel was created for. Here at Exhibit A, we investigate the extraordinary stories hidden inside the ordinary objects you use every day, from the foods on your table to the inventions that quietly shaped civilization. If you don't want to miss the next investigation, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if this documentary changed the way you'll look at sugar forever, let us know in the comments. What's the next everyday object you'd like us to uncover? Because every ordinary object has a secret history, and at Exhibit A, we're here to reveal it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.